Welcome to Africa. Please abandon all expectations. You've decided to explore Africa. Great. Your boots will rot, your camel will hate you, and you will definitely get dysentery. Congratulations, intrepid adventurer. You've awoken one morning in the 18th or 19th century, shaken off the smell of European civilization, which is mostly chimney smoke and the light scent of unwashed wigs, and decided it's high time you discovered something big, something wild, something that already has about 800 different names from the people living there. Yes, you're going to explore Africa. Why? For glory, for science, for colonial empires pretending they're doing it for God, but mostly because no one told you how incredibly awful it's going to be. Your guidebook? It's a single parchment with avoid lions scrawled on it. Your knowledge of the continent? It consists of vague stories from sailors who once traded beads for giraffe tails and swore they saw a river that flowed uphill. You're basically the human version of a toddler wandering into traffic with a flag. Hello, travelers. Histories do not always need to be boring. You can rest here and listen to hilarious histories to drift off to sleep. Before we continue, leave a comment to let me know when and where you are listening to this, and hit the subscribe button, but only if you enjoy what I do here. Let's begin. Starting with the basics, to the European mind of the time, Africa was the last great mystery, a vast boiling landmass that appeared on maps as a giant, intimidating blob, labelled with things like unexplored interior, land of the moon, or simply, here be heatstroke. If you're lucky, your map might feature a poorly drawn elephant and a river that somehow makes a perfect loop. If you're unlucky, it'll feature nothing but the names of European explorers who wandered in and were never seen again. Because lions don't leave Yelp reviews. This unknown status, of course, ignored one minor detail. Millions of people were already living there. Africa wasn't some empty, untouched Eden just waiting for your sweaty, sock-chafed feet to bless its soil. It was home to sprawling empires, ancient trade routes, complex religions, entire universities, and more languages than you could mispronounce in a single afternoon. While Europe was still figuring out how not to throw sewage out the window, Timbuktu had libraries, city planning, and scholars discussing astronomy under mango trees. But sure, go ahead and discover it. In fact, long before you ever considered this journey, Africans themselves were exploring the continent and far beyond. Meet Hanno the Navigator, a Carthaginian explorer from the 5th century BCE, who sailed down the West African coast with a fleet of ships, recording exotic animals, weird volcanoes, and locals who were probably wondering why this guy kept trying to talk to trees. Hanno's account, the Periplus of Hanno, is basically the first travel blog, except written on papyrus and severely lacking a selfie stick. Fast forward 1,000 years or so, and you'll find Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan scholar who basically made Marco Polo look like a couch potato. Battuta traveled across North and West Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and even as far as China, on foot, on camel, and occasionally via please don't sink boat. He took extensive notes, formed diplomatic ties, and somehow survived decades of travel without succumbing to angry hippos or British accents. When he reached Mali, he documented its wealth, governance, and educational system. Europe, meanwhile, thought gold grew on trees somewhere in the Congo-ish region, and sent explorers to go find the nearest enchanted waterfall. So what made Africa such a mystery to European adventurers? Well, it wasn't that it was unknowable. It was that Europe didn't know it, and therefore assumed no one else could either. It's the same logic as a toddler covering their eyes and assuming the room disappeared. Europeans saw deserts, jungles, and coastlines, and filled in the blanks with myth. The mountains of the moon, probably full of dragons. The Congo River might turn you into a frog. Giant lakes in the center of the continent, likely fed by unicorn tears and guarded by sorcerers. And so, the tone is set. You, future explorer, are strapping on your boots made of wool and bad decisions and preparing to enter this great, uncharted land. You are ready to blaze a trail, conquer the wilderness, and document your journey with sketches of elephants that look suspiciously like house cats. You've got your compass, which you've already dropped, your gun, which rusted overnight, and your medical supplies, a bottle of gin and a leech in a jar named Gerald. You're not alone, of course. Your colonial sponsor back home wants maps, minerals, and maybe a thrilling tale of how you civilized a hill. Your companions are wondering why you insisted on wearing a waistcoat into the Sahara. and your local guides are already placing bets on how long it'll take before you scream at a gecko. This is Africa. It does not care about your titles, your medals, or your monocle. It is vast, vibrant, dangerous, ingenious, beautiful, brutal, and deeply unimpressed with your facial hair. So buckle up, because the real journey starts now. You're not just going to explore Africa. Africa is about to explore you. Packing for an African expedition in the 18th or 19th century was less about efficiency and more about bringing as many completely useless items as humanly possible. Think of it as the Victorian version of overpacking for a weekend trip, except instead of forgetting your toothbrush, you forgot how nature works. Let's begin with the essentials. First, your outfit. The European explorer simply could not fathom entering the tropics without at least 17 layers of wool, tweed, and regret. Even if you're headed straight into the equator, it is absolutely imperative that your knees remain unexposed. Sun protection, unnecessary. You've got your pith helmet, a beige dome so absurdly colonial, it could declare a protectorate just by existing. Next up, your gear. Explorers typically brought a wide array of essentials, including a compass, which spins wildly during sandstorms, and makes you feel competent until you realize you've walked in a circle for 6 hours. Gunpowder and muskets, for protection against wildlife, which would have been useful if they didn't jam every time a light drizzle hit them. Sketchbooks and watercolor sets, because when you're being charged by a rhino, there's no better time to practice light shading. And a folding chair, because comfort trumps survival. And then there's the food. Oh, the food. Your supply crates are packed with tins of boiled beef that resemble shoe polish, stacks of hardtack that can chip teeth, and delicate British biscuits, which you'll find have a shelf life of about 6 minutes in the jungle before being discovered by the local ant royal family. You might have also brought a few bottles of claret for medical use, which you'll end up drinking in a single sitting after realizing the jungle birds sound like they're mocking you. They are, but wait, you're not done yet. You'll also need a sextant, which you'll pretend to know how to use, a traveling desk, because who doesn't want to pen poetry about malaria in the wild? And maybe a portable bathtub, because God forbid you explore the African interior unclean. Now all of this sounds charming until you realize porters, usually dozens of them, will have to carry every ridiculous item you've decided was necessary. While you are dripping in sweat by hour 2, they're hauling crates of your pickled ham, your footlocker of linen socks, and your entire existential crisis. If your party includes live chickens strapped to the side of a mule named Florence, you're doing it right, or terribly, or both. However, there's one item more valuable than all your gear combined, your guide. Let's get something straight. You call him your guide. He calls you this guy. I'll probably have to rescue. He's the reason you're not already buried in a sand dune or stuck knee-deep in a termite nest, crying into your field journal. These local guides, translators and scouts, who are often experienced hunters, traders or diplomats, were the unsung heroes of every expedition. They didn't just know the terrain, they were the terrain. While you were trying to figure out why your boots had melted, your guide was calculating river depths by glancing at a tree. While you debated which way the compass was pointing, your guide had already found a shortcut, a watering hole, and a man who could fix your wheel using only bark and charm. He speaks 5 local languages, 3 trade dialects, and enough English to say, "We go now," followed by, "You stand in elephant poop." Of course, explorers rarely credited these people properly in their official accounts. Journals would read things like, "Today, I bravely crossed the swamp," when what actually happened was, your guide piggybacked you across it, while slapping leeches off your legs like some kind of jungle nanny. Now, let's talk theft. You've barely made it 5 miles out of your base camp, and something is already missing. A saddlebag, gone. A crate of rum, vanished. Your dignity. That went back with the camel. Theft was a natural part of expeditions, not because the locals were dishonest, but because your entire camp looked like a walking department store, and your security system was yelling, "Oi," into the bushes. Sometimes your own porters would disappear at night, taking only what they could carry, and by what they could carry, I mean everything you actually needed. If you wake up and find your best boots replaced with a single sandal and a pineapple, congrats. You've been gently reminded that maybe don't travel with more luggage than a small kingdom. And don't even get me started on how the wildlife would rob you. baboons stealing your maps, hyenas carrying off your cooking pots, monkeys untying knots and flinging your compass into the river while making prolonged eye contact. In truth, most early expeditions lost a third of their supplies within the first few weeks, either to natural disasters, cunning animals, or the chaotic brilliance of "you didn't tie that down properly." Chapter 1. Some expeditions spent more time searching for stolen baggage than doing any actual exploring. At some point, every explorer has the same soul-crushing realization: you packed like you were going to a spa, and now you're living in a jungle-themed survival show. So, let this be your official warning. Pack lightly, pack smartly, and if you're bringing wine and biscuits, so are the ants. So you've packed your tweed underwear, you've lost half your wine to ants, and your guide has already saved you from a mildly suspicious log. Now, it's time to move. Across the blistering Sahara, through the vine-choked jungle, into rivers that double as reptile Airbnb properties. And you, dear explorer, must now choose your noble steed. Let's start with camels, because nothing says deep personal suffering quite like a week on top of a lumpy, irritated meat tower. Camels are nature's way of saying, you want to survive, fine, but you won't like it. These creatures have evolved specifically to make humans question their life choices. They can go days without water, eat literal thorns, and walk through hell's sauna while belching like a foghorn. And while you're marveling at this biological miracle, the camel is actively trying to bite your kneecaps off. Their smell is a distinct blend of damp burlap, boiled sadness, and old parchment. And their temperament, imagine a bureaucrat who's been asked to work overtime for free. That's a camel. You could be dying of thirst, collapsing from sunstroke, and this beast will stare into your soul like, cry harder, colonizer. But across the Sahara, you have no choice. Horses, dead in a week. Oxen, too slow. You, laughable. Camels are the Uber of the desert, except they spit in your face and occasionally sit down mid-journey out of what can only be described as pure spite. And the Sahara itself? Oh, she's lovely. If your idea of hospitality involves grit in every orifice and sand dunes taller than your optimism, walking through it is like trying to find your way in an oven filled with powdered sugar and rage. Mirage-induced hallucinations are common. You'll swear you see water. You'll run toward it. It will turn out to be a rock. You will weep. The rock will judge you. But maybe, just maybe, you thought, hey, I'll avoid the desert. Let's explore the rivers instead. Sweet summer child, allow me to introduce you to the dugout canoe. Imagine a hollowed-out tree trunk with dreams of capsizing. That's your boat. You'll wobble down the Congo or the Niger, trying to balance your bag, your sketchbook, and your sense of dignity, while your local paddler handles rapids with the casual ease of someone who knows exactly where the crocodiles like to sunbathe. River travel is not gentle. The humidity alone could melt your diary. Mosquitoes hover in biblical swarms. Your supplies get soaked. At least one snake will drop from a tree directly into your canoe, and your response will not be heroic. It will be a scream so shrill it startles nearby hippos. Oh yes, hippos. Not the cuddly water cows of cartoon fame, but territorial tanks with teeth the size of cutlery. More explorers were attacked by hippos than lions. You might think, but I'm not doing anything to it. To which the hippo replies, you exist. That's enough. Still think walking is the answer. Let's discuss trekking on foot, also known as the you're going to die tired strategy. You start out strong. You're hydrated. You've got your boots laced. By hour 3, you're hallucinating shade that doesn't exist. By hour 5, your socks are dissolving into your skin, and you've discovered blisters on body parts you didn't know had skin. You'll hike through mud so deep it tries to steal your boots, and jungles so dense your compass gives up and becomes decorative. Your guides slice through the underbrush with machetes while you swat at something that may or may not be a mosquito, a fairy, or the early signs of heat stroke. And let's talk leeches. They don't wait for permission. They invite themselves into your boots, your trousers, and the folds of your soul. You won't see them until you sit down and feel your socks squish like a juice box. Removing them involves salt, fire, and a little bit of screaming. Mostly screaming. Some explorers thought the jungle would be lush and romantic. What they got was the world's angriest greenhouse, complete with trees that drop venomous caterpillars and vines that look suspiciously like snakes. you'll find yourself whispering, "Is that a path?" Only to realize it's the imprint left by the last person who got lost here. That person, still missing. And just when you think, surely this is as bad as it gets, your guide cheerfully informs you that no, you're not lost. This is the actual trail. It's just that the trail hates you. So you forge on, one step at a time, through terrain that's actively trying to erase your existence from the Earth's memory. Ultimately, whether you're riding a disgruntled camel through the Sahara, navigating crocodile alleys in a floating tree trunk, or trudging on foot like a damp colonial ghost, one truth becomes clear. Exploring Africa is less about getting from point A to B, and more about surviving the alphabet soup in between. And remember, regret is not optional, it's part of the experience. Let's just clear the air right now. You're not the hero in this story. You, the bold European explorer, staggering through the savannah with sunburn on top of your sunburn, feel very accomplished for having successfully walked in a circle for 3 days. You call it charting uncharted territory. The locals call it watching you walk past their cousin's house for the 4th time. Because the truth is, while your boots are slowly fusing to your feet, and your compass is giving you the emotional equivalent of a shrug, the people who actually live here have been running entire kingdoms, trade empires, and diplomatic missions since before your ancestors figured out how to put on pants properly. You build blisters. They build cities. Let's talk about those cities, shall we? You've probably never heard of Great Zimbabwe, unless you got really lucky in a history class that wasn't written with a massive Eurocentric blindfold. But long before you thought to scribble discovered on a random hill, there were stone cities with walls so precisely constructed that they didn't even need mortar. Meanwhile, your expedition tent collapses if someone sneezes too hard. Or take Timbuktu, a city that became a literal Google Drive for Islamic knowledge, with libraries full of astronomical texts, philosophy, medicine, law, and more. European visitors were blown away by how many people could read. Spoiler alert, that included women, scholars, merchants, and pretty much everyone who wasn't covered in camel spit. You came looking for adventure. They were busy managing trans-Saharan trade networks that ran smoother than your digestive system after that mystery stew you ate on day 2. The gold, salt, ivory, textiles, spices. These weren't just commodities, they were the backbone of sprawling, complex economies. And you show up with beads and think you've invented commerce. Some explorers honestly believe they were introducing Africa to civilization. This is like handing a spoon to a master chef and acting like you invented cooking. African societies had diplomatic protocols, multilingual translators, tax systems, and a cultural memory that went back hundreds of generations. Which brings us to oral history. Not just storytelling, but a living archive of geography, lineage, climate data, conflict resolution, and cosmic meaning. Griots in West Africa were human libraries, trained from childhood to recall centuries of genealogy and political alliances. Meanwhile, you forgot where you put your sketchbook this morning, and are pretty sure your journal is currently being used as toilet paper by the camp monkey. Let's talk navigation. You, with your broken compass and half-drawn maps that look like a toddler's finger painting, are painfully out of your depth. You think the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. The locals know how to read the soil, smell the wind, identify bird flight paths, and use the stars like a GPS from the gods. You're trying to guess where the river bends. Their great-grandmother can predict a flash flood 3 days in advance by watching how the frogs are hopping. And the terrain? It's not just known, it's respected, manipulated, and lived with. Agricultural systems were designed around the rhythms of the land, terracing, irrigation, seasonal migrations, all fine-tuned to a level you'll never achieve, even if you live to 120 and marry a baobab tree. Then there's diplomacy. You fumble through greetings, mispronounce every name, and accidentally offend a chief by offering your left hand. Local leaders, they're pros. They've been navigating alliances, marriages, and trade disputes for centuries. When the explorers showed up with muskets and mustaches, most African leaders didn't panic. They negotiated. They leveraged. They played the long game. You thought you were holding the cards. Turns out you were just the wild card. To be clear, this isn't to dunk on you for comic relief, okay? Maybe a little. It's to highlight the deeply established intelligence, sophistication, and resilience of African societies. Long before exploration became a thing, Africa was not an empty stage waiting for European actors. It was a vast, ancient theatre with an ensemble cast, a full script, and an audience that didn't particularly care for your costume. And let's be honest, half the time you were learning more than discovering. You copied their survival techniques, relied on their food, begged for their translators, and followed the paths they cleared generations ago. That heroic trek into the unknown. Yeah, it was known, just not by you. So next time you stare dramatically into the distance while your camel bites your hat, take a moment to appreciate that the real expertise was all around you, and if you're lucky, they'll keep guiding you, even if you don't deserve it. If you've ever dreamed of being one of the great African explorers, noble, daring, windswept hair catching the golden sun, as you heroically chart the unknown, you should know something. Most of them were woefully unprepared, alarmingly sick, and constantly wondering why everything itched. These guys didn't so much conquer the continent, as they barely limped through it, hallucinating from malaria, and clutching a journal full of observations like, note to self, hippos are not friendly. Hippos are liars. Let's start with Mungo Park, the Scottish doctor whose brilliant idea was to trace the Niger River by just following it. That's it. No backup plan, no real support, just pure rugged optimism and the unwavering belief that dysentery would respect his schedule. His 1795 expedition was ambitious. Find the river, map it, survive. He managed the first two, barely. He was captured by local leaders, freed, then nearly died in the desert, before eventually floating down the river, like an extremely lost canoe salesman. His diary reads like the slow descent into a heat-stroke-induced fever dream. He returned to Britain, received a hero's welcome, and like a true glutton for punishment, went back for round two. This time he built a boat, loaded it with muskets and surly Scotsmen, and basically tried to shoot his way down the river. Spoiler, it didn't work. Locals, understandably unimpressed by the floating gun parade, attacked. Mungo's final words, probably shouted mid-rapids, were never recorded, but we can assume they were something like, "I regret everything." Next up, David Livingstone, the Victorian age superstar missionary explorer, whose hobbies included getting lost for years, writing painfully detailed notes about waterfalls, and somehow surviving illnesses that would knock out a rhino. Livingstone believed in combining exploration with moral purpose, which meant he spent a lot of time wandering into dangerous territory in the name of anti-slavery advocacy, and occasionally forgetting to tell anyone where he was going. He went missing in the 1860s for so long that Britain basically assumed he was either dead or had moved in with a giraffe. In 1871, journalist Henry Morton Stanley was sent to find him, ideally before someone declared him a saint or named a tea set after him. After an absurd trek through the jungle, Stanley stumbled upon him in the town of Uji, Tanzania, and famously greeted him with Dr. Livingstone, I presume, the most British way to say, "Wow, you're not a skeleton." Livingstone's strength wasn't necessarily exploration, it was being utterly unkillable. He fought off tropical diseases, survived crocodile attacks, and kept trekking while other men were tapping out halfway through lunch. He was also deeply influenced by the African guides, porters and friends he met along the way, learning languages, customs and geography from people who had actually lived there longer than the length of a fever nap. And now, a man who deserves way more credit than he gets, Ibn Battuta. He's the Moroccan traveller who essentially said, "I see your Marco Polo and raise you literally every known road on earth." He set off in 1325 to perform the Hajj to Mecca, then just kept going. For 29 years, across Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, India, and even parts of China, he travelled over 73,000 miles, on foot, camel, boat, and possibly on pure stubbornness. When he hit East Africa, he didn't explore, he interacted. He visited Kilwa and Mogadishu, documented Swahili cultures, and noted how vibrant trade and scholarship already were. And unlike many European explorers who turned every hill into a discovery, Ibn Battuta actually listened to people. He recorded what they said. He didn't claim to discover Africa. He was a guest. Of course, not every explorer fared well. Some didn't even make it past the coast. They arrived in heavy wool uniforms, drank the local water like it owed them money, and promptly fell over with something unpronounceable. One man brought a collapsible bathtub and died before he even got to use it. The jungle doesn't care about your bathing schedule, but the ones who did survive learned fast. You don't explore Africa alone. You make friends. You listen. You follow the guy who's already crossed the savannah 6 times and knows which fruit won't make you see colors. The real takeaway. These so-called great explorers didn't succeed because of superior European intellect or bravery. They succeeded when they did, because local African guides, porters, healers, and leaders helped them survive. Period. So next time someone tells you about the heroic age of exploration, remember, it wasn't about heroism. It was about weathering every possible plague, while someone infinitely more competent pulled your sorry boots out of the mud. So you've made it across the scorching dunes. Your camel has finally stopped judging you, and your guide has only rolled his eyes 17 times today. Things are looking up, that is, until nature tries to eat you. Let's be clear. African wildlife does not care about your expedition. The continent's fauna isn't there for your sketches or National Geographic dreams. It's there to bite you, chase you, trample you, and in one memorable baboon incident, pants you. First, the mosquitoes. You thought you knew mosquitoes, cute little buzzers from back home that annoy you at barbecues. No, African mosquitoes are a different breed entirely. These ones have ambition. They don't just bite you, they inject you with malaria, dengue, or chikungunya, and then circle back for seconds. They've evolved to ignore your mosquito net, laugh at your repellent, and find the one gap in your socks at 3 a.m. like heat-seeking vampires. If you listen closely, you'll hear them buzzing. Not like insects, but like tiny helicopters whispering, "We've been waiting for you." You've heard of bees, you've heard of horseflies, but have you heard of the tsetse fly? Imagine a regular fly, now give it the bite strength of a disgruntled dentist, and a venomous payload that causes something charmingly called sleeping sickness. Symptoms include fever, confusion, swollen lymph nodes, and eventually, sleep so deep you may never wake up. Explorers of old would ride through what seemed like paradise, lush, green, beautiful, only to suddenly find their entire pack train drooling, stumbling, and collapsing in slow motion. Not from exhaustion, but from brainworms. Fun. And no, slapping them doesn't help. They're faster than guilt, and more stubborn than your travel insurance agent. Let's talk about hippos. The modern zoo-going public thinks they're jolly, balloon-shaped bathtub blobs. Wrong. These things are land submarines with teeth, territorial nightmares, who kill more humans in Africa than lions do. Yes, the vegetarian. Yes, the one shaped like a beanbag. Get too close to a river, and suddenly you'll see 3,000 pounds of angry waterhorse charging at you like it's late for a very violent meeting. They can run faster than you. On land, in water, they are torpedoes with murder on the mind. You try to escape in your canoe. Guess what? The hippo is already under it, flipping it like it's auditioning for river dance. Your last sight before you go under is its giant pink maw, which for some reason smells like fermented hay and doom. You've pitched your tent. You've lit your fire. You're about to eat your half-cooked stew when you hear it. A low growl, somewhere out in the darkness. Could be your stomach. Could also be a lion the size of a sofa, deciding whether you're worth the chewing effort. Lions don't usually hunt humans, unless you're alone, or limping, or glowing slightly from that fever you caught 3 rivers ago. To a lion, you're a low-effort meal that won't sprint far, and probably taste like boiled socks. But that's fine. They're not picky. Some explorers used to hang bells on their tents to scare lions off. Others kept fires burning all night. Most just accepted that at some point they'd hear a rustle, scream, "Oh no," and throw their biscuits in the other direction as bait. Elephants are majestic, intelligent, and surprisingly irritable. You might think they'll trumpet and let you pass gracefully, but if one thinks you're threatening its calf, or you parked your camel too close, it'll flatten your expedition like a poorly built IKEA shelf, and it won't feel bad at all. Baboons? Oh, baboons are agents of chaos. They don't want to kill you. They want to emotionally destroy you. They steal your food, unzip your pack, take your maps, and occasionally flash their colourful rear ends in triumph. One explorer reported losing an entire week's rations to a gang of baboons who then sat on a hill eating them while making eye contact. And snakes. Of course there are snakes. Cobras that spit in your eyes, puff adders that hide under your sleeping mat, and the delightfully named black mamba, which is not a jazz musician but a bullet-shaped terror that can slither 12 miles per hour and deliver a fatal bite in under 30 minutes. It's the Usain Bolt of horror noodles. In short, the wildlife of Africa doesn't need a reason. You're the reason. You're the crunchy, foreign-flavored snack wandering around in a heatstroke haze, and nature's not going to pass up this buffet. The animals you thought would dazzle you from a distance. They're in your tent, your boots, your nightmares. And the punchline? Half the explorers we celebrate today didn't die from the epic rivers or mysterious cultures. They got taken out by a spider hiding in their pants. Congratulations, explorer. After months of heatstroke, camel-induced trauma, and near-death experiences involving bugs with doctoral degrees in mischief, you've finally done it. You've made a map. It's just one small problem. It's entirely wrong. Mapping Africa became the obsession of 19th century European explorers, the way sourdough bread became an obsession in 2020. Except instead of wasting flour, these guys wasted entire countries. The blank spaces on the European maps weren't actually blank. They were just labeled things like unexplored, savage interior, or occasionally, a question mark. This led to the creation of some of the most unintentionally hilarious maps in human history. Rivers that looped like spaghetti, mountains that didn't exist, and kingdoms misplaced by hundreds of miles. One legendary example shows a lake shaped like a banana, just because the mapmaker had heatstroke and lost all concept of geometry. Even worse, some maps were just plagiarized. One explorer would scribble down a shaky guess about the Congo River, and the next guy would copy it wholesale, and then add a unicorn somewhere for good measure. See, Europeans often referred to Africa as the dark continent, not because it was actually dark, it's blindingly bright, thanks very much, but because they didn't know what was there. This branding had less to do with reality and more to do with imperial marketing. If Africa was mysterious and unknown, it justified sending dozens of men with sideburns and leather boots to discover things that had already been discovered by the people living there. Case in point, Lake Victoria. When John Hanning Speke stumbled upon it in 1858, he announced to the world that he'd discovered the source of the Nile. A proud moment, until you realize that the surrounding communities had been living, fishing, naming, and arguing about that lake for centuries. It's like showing up to a pizza place, declaring, "I have discovered pepperoni," and then wondering why the chef is glaring at you. Let's not pretend making a map was easy, though. There were no drones, no satellites, and certainly no little blue dot on Google Maps showing where you left your donkey. Explorers relied on compasses, astrolabes, pacing counts, and the occasional lucky guess. They sketched from canoes while dodging hippos. They tried to chart mountains from 40 miles away, while blinking through clouds of biting flies. And since most expeditions were sponsored by governments or societies back home, the maps had to look good, which meant many explorers tweaked their sketches to appear more impressive. That mountain? Let's add a few hundred feet. That bend in the river? Let's make it swoop dramatically. It'll look great on a wall. One particularly bold mapmaker confidently drew the mountains of the moon across Central Africa, a feature that had no geological basis, but sounded incredibly cool. It stayed on European maps for centuries, entirely imaginary. Many maps were drawn in conditions unfit for coherent thought, fever-ridden, half-starved, and frequently concussed. These men somehow still managed to put pen to parchment. This explains a lot. One explorer tried to chart a coastline while experiencing malaria hallucinations. The resulting map features not only a misplaced delta, but what appears to be a lobster-shaped peninsula. Another confused a thundercloud for a mountain range, and then named it after his sponsor's wife. Imagine explaining that when the clouds cleared. Worse, even well-meaning cartographers had a terrible tendency to erase African place names and replace them with names from their own cultures. Victoria Falls instead of Mozio Tunia, Lake Albert instead of Lake Mutanzig, and so on. Which is sort of like breaking into someone's house, putting your name on the mailbox, and then acting confused when they don't thank you. This was the era of the grand discovery. European newspapers ate it up. Man finds unknown river. They screamed. Never mind that trade had already been happening along that river for generations. Explorer discovers hidden lake. They shouted, right as 5 local children jumped in for a swim. There was little acknowledgement of the reality that Africans had mapped their own regions for centuries, using oral history, star positions, and environmental markers. Some trade routes were so well known that merchants could recite the journey like a poem, complete with verses about where to camp and which hill not to climb because of ghosts, or worse, snakes. These weren't the blank slates that the West imagined. They were deeply known, intricately traversed landscapes that just didn't match up with what European cartographers expected. And so, instead of admitting their maps were broken, explorers often just added another fictional mountain and blamed the discrepancy on tribal exaggeration. And so, your map is finished. It's got style, flair, even some watercolor shading. You've drawn elephants in the margins. You've labeled a crater. Definitely not where we got lost. You present it to your patron back home, who is delighted. 6 months later, the next expedition gets lost, using your map, and writes angrily to the Royal Geographical Society. We followed the explorer's river. It led us directly into a swamp full of very unfriendly frogs. Still, history will remember your name, maybe not for accuracy, but certainly for enthusiasm. By now, your boots have melted, your rations are mostly ants with crumbs attached, and you're beginning to suspect that the compass needle is just spinning out of pity. You, noble explorer, are on the edge of collapse. But just when you're about to invent a dramatic final monologue, you glance up, and there's a local villager, calmly walking past with a basket on their head, perfectly fine, offering you a piece of dried mango like you're the one who looks weird. Welcome to the eternal reality of African exploration. You may have studied geography, but they studied survival. Let's start with the biggest issue. The sun. The African sun doesn't just shine, it interrogates. It's less warmth and light, and more wrath of the gods. European explorers, in their genius, often wore thick woolen uniforms, buttoned to the neck, because that's what was appropriate, which is exactly what you want in 42 degrees Celsius heat, with no cloud cover, a mobile sauna suit. Local communities, meanwhile, had perfected the art of cool survival. Loose, light clothing, shade-seeking instincts, knowledge of terrain. You stumble around sunburned and hallucinating about goats. They're napping under a strategically placed acacia tree, sipping from a calabash. Here's a free tip. If the locals are sitting down and you're still marching, you're doing it wrong. Your expedition's food supply, hardtack, preserved meats, and whatever you found rolling at the bottom of a barrel has turned into a science experiment, and your stomach is conducting the peer review. Locals, on the other hand, have honed survival diets that are light, nutritious, and most importantly, not poisonous. Millet, yams, dried fruits and wild greens that have names you can't pronounce, but your guide insists are good for heat energy or stomach spirits. You scoff, take another bite of British Army biscuit, and immediately regret your life choices. They know which berries will give you a mild sugar boost, and which ones will introduce you to the other side. You do well to copy them. But no, you're still trying to boil puddle water with an alcohol lamp while muttering about filtration methods. Water purification was a huge concern for explorers, and rightly so. One wrong sip, and you're in for an intestinal rollercoaster named Dysentery's Revenge. So you've brought a chemical kit, some iodine tablets, and a book that says you should boil for 10 minutes and strain through a kerchief. Meanwhile, the locals take one look at your chosen water source and say, "Don't drink that pond is cursed." You assume it's superstition. They assume you have a death wish. Then your assistant drinks from it, grows a third eyelid, and spends 3 days communicating in grunts. The truth is, cursed pond often translates to used for livestock bathing, mosquito breeding, and spiritual dumping ground. Locals didn't need a microscope. They had generations of trial, error, and unfortunate uncles to figure out where not to sip. You came prepared with books. They came prepared with experience. While you trudge through the savannah measuring every 12 steps with a brass device, a local tracker is navigating by the position of termite mounds, the smell of rain in the wind, and the color of lichen on tree bark. You scoff until your GPS device breaks, and he leads you to water with nothing but a stick and a shrug. You panic when you hear a rustle in the bushes. He glances over and casually says, "Just a warthog." You scream. He laughs. You carry 3 types of soap, antiseptic wipes, and a towel soaked in quinine. He carries a small pouch of powdered bark that treats infections, repels mosquitoes, and probably repaints your kitchen if applied correctly. And when night falls and you fumble with your tent ropes and mosquito net, he's already built a wind-sheltered fire pit and is roasting something that smells suspiciously better than anything you've eaten in 3 weeks. Here's a common mistake: assuming that locals aren't afraid of the land just because they live in it. They are. They've just learned how not to get eaten by it. They know which time of year not to cross that river because of crocodile migration. They know that if the birds go silent in the forest, you should run. They know the difference between monsoon incoming and just a moody afternoon. You, meanwhile, are still trying to decode cloud formations and losing a debate with a monkey over the last banana. It wasn't the guys with maps and flags who survived. It was those who listened. The smart explorers, the ones who lived to tell the tale, hired local experts and actually took their advice. They stopped wearing hats that doubled as ovens. They learned to walk early in the morning and rest at noon. They adapted, and those who didn't, well, there's a termite mound somewhere, marking their legacy. Congratulations, you finally dragged yourself out of the savannah jungle or whatever nightmare you called a wilderness, and made it back to civilization. Well, sort of. If surviving Africa was the hardest part, surviving the aftermath might just be a close second. For many explorers, coming home was less like a triumphant march and more like a swan dive into muddy expectations. You arrived dusty, sunburned, and smelling faintly of something that probably should have been left in the wild. But don't worry, the European press is ready to turn your misery into legend. In newspapers and lecture halls, you're suddenly a fearless adventurer, a brave soul boldly conquering the unknown. The truth: you spent more time chasing your own tail, treating infections, and arguing with your guide about directions than heroically planting flags. But hey, explorer sells better than lost guy with sunstroke. You'll sign book deals with titles like Through Fire, Fever, and Fool's Gold, or My Life Among the Lions Who Tried to Eat Me. Your publisher won't care that you spent half the expedition hallucinating and the other half regretting every life choice. All that matters is that you can tell a good story and that you survived long enough to write it. Sure, you get some fame, maybe even a medal or a fancy hat with feathers. But let's be honest, the locals aren't exactly sending you thank you cards. To them, you're mostly a warning. Don't be like that guy. He thought a hippo was a nice pet. Or remember that guy who tried to map the river but got malaria. Yeah, don't follow him. You're famous in Europe for charting uncharted lands. Lands that have been lived in, farmed and navigated for centuries by people who didn't exactly need a map. And in Africa, you're the reason someone else has to haul your equipment out of a thorn bush, or negotiate your ransom with a tribe you offended by accidentally sitting on their sacred rock. History often paints explorers as heroic figures, adorned with the glow of discovery and achievement. But the real story is more survival horror and less Indiana Jones. Remember David Livingstone, who supposedly walked hundreds of miles without complaint? The real man once admitted he was so exhausted, dehydrated, and feverish that he couldn't even remember his own name. Mungo Park's epic expedition down the Niger River didn't just bring new maps, it brought repeated bouts of illness, mutiny, and near-death experiences. And poor Ibn Battuta, who travelled farther than most and chronicled it with enviable detail, often ended his tales with, "and then I got sick again." No one ever tells you about the endless swarms of mosquitoes, the relentless heat, the biting flies, or the time you accidentally sat on a scorpion. Your journal entries would mostly say, "Still alive, barely." Here's a sobering fact: a good number of these explorers didn't make it back at all. Some died quietly in remote villages, others succumbed to tropical diseases that modern medicine can barely remember how to cure. Some were eaten by wildlife, though usually not in a dramatic last stand fashion, more like a tragic, oops, wrong place, wrong time. Take Henry Morton Stanley, who was known for his relentless drive and famous phrase, "Dr. Livingstone," I presume. His expeditions left behind a trail of exhaustion, broken morale, and at least one close call with death. Or John Hanning Speke, who discovered Lake Victoria, but died under mysterious circumstances, with some historians speculating it was suicide or accident. Many of these men are footnotes in history, or perhaps feetnotes, depending on how the local wildlife felt about their presence. While the big names get all the glory, there were dozens, if not hundreds, of lesser-known adventurers whose stories are buried under layers of dust and neglect. They didn't write best-selling books or receive medals. Their tales often end in obscurity, illness, or quietly returning home with no fanfare, only to live the rest of their lives telling awkward stories at dinner parties. Some explorers even went native, marrying into local communities, or settling down quietly after the excitement ended. They didn't become legends, but they survived. And that's a kind of success in itself. Did these explorers get rich? Not really. Many spent their own fortunes on expeditions that drained bank accounts faster than a lion devours a zebra. Sponsors demanded results, maps, discoveries, or valuable resources, or your funding got cut, along with your hopes of returning home. If you were lucky, you parlayed your adventures into lectures and books, earning enough to survive comfortably. More often, you returned poor, scarred, and slightly insane, with a trunk full of exotic souvenirs and a reputation that made local wildlife glare at you in disbelief. Exploring Africa was never a glamorous affair. It was a brutal, messy, feverish fight to stay alive long enough to tell a story that would mostly glorify the explorer and gloss over the real heroes, the local guides, the communities, and the land itself. So the next time you hear about a great explorer conquering Africa, remember, behind every legend was a man or woman who was just trying not to get eaten, and mostly failing, because fame, fortune, a spot in history, that's just the icing on the dust-covered, sunburnt cake. So you survived the fever, the bites, the heat, the wild animals, and the ever-present possibility of getting completely gloriously lost. You returned to civilization, possibly missing a few toes, and definitely missing your favorite pair of socks. Now, what did all that effort actually leave behind? Spoiler alert, it's a messy legacy with a side of stuffed crocodiles. First, let's give credit where credit's due. These explorers, despite all their blunders and bad decisions, did bring back something valuable knowledge. They documented languages, customs, plants, animals, and geography. Thanks to their dusty journals and awkward sketches, we know a lot more about Africa's vast diversity than European minds could have imagined. Some explorers took the time to learn from the locals, absorbing stories, myths, and survival strategies. This was the beginning of cultural exchange, albeit a one-sided and often clumsy kind. In some cases, explorers helped establish trade routes or connected previously isolated communities, fostering new relationships that would, in theory, benefit both sides. Without their efforts, and occasional disasters, our understanding of Africa's rich history might have taken much longer to develop outside the continent. But here's where the story darkens. Exploration often paved the way for colonization. Those uncharted territories were rarely unknown to the people living there. Yet European powers used explorers' maps and reports as blueprints for taking control, sometimes violently. This led to the scramble for Africa, a period when European countries carved up the continent with little regard for local borders, cultures, or lives. What started as curiosity and scientific interest morphed into conquest and exploitation. Indigenous peoples were displaced, resources were plundered, and centuries-old societies were disrupted. Many explorers, knowingly or unknowingly, became foot soldiers of empire, whether wielding a pen, a gun, or simply their discovery stories. The complicated legacy of exploration reminds us that curiosity has a cost. Sometimes the price was cultural destruction and human suffering on a massive scale. And then there's the weird stuff. Oh yes, Victorian-era museums ended up stuffed with all kinds of bizarre trophies brought back by explorers. Imagine walking into a grand hall lined with giant crocodiles, oversized snakes preserved in jars, and mysterious artifacts no one quite understands. Some explorers returned with souvenirs like stuffed lions, mummified tribal relics, or jars full of strange insects. One particularly creative adventurer even brought back a carved wooden idol that was actually a cleverly disguised toilet seat, because why not? These oddities became part of the spectacle that fascinated and terrified European audiences, fueling both curiosity and misconceptions about Africa. They were trophies of adventure, proof that someone had been there, even if they mostly got lost and ate questionable food. Perhaps the most fitting legacy is that exploration wasn't a one-way street. While explorers aimed to map rivers, scale mountains, and catalogue wildlife, Africa did something equally profound. It changed them. It challenged their assumptions, broke their bodies, and rewrote their understanding of the world. You might have started with a fancy compass and a grand plan, but somewhere between the relentless sun the endless insects, and the labyrinth of villages and landscapes, Africa explored you. You came back, different, tired, humbled, sunburned, and probably a little crazier than when you left. And let's not forget the socks. Those poor forgotten socks, usually lost to mud, sweat, or an overly curious baboon, are the unsung relics of every expedition. They symbolize the messiness of exploration. No matter how prepared you think you are, you're going to lose something along the way. Sometimes it's your belongings, sometimes your dignity, and sometimes your entire concept of adventure. So what did these intrepid souls leave behind? A patchwork of maps and tales that shaped how the world saw Africa. A complex legacy that includes cultural exchange, tragic exploitation, and surprising oddities, and a trail of socks, hatpins, and maybe a few misplaced teeth. Exploration is a story of human curiosity and resilience, often clumsy, sometimes heroic, and always messy. But above all, it's a reminder, you didn't just explore Africa, Africa explored you. So you're hot, not in the Tinder way, but in the sweaty, medieval, heat stroke is imminent kind of way. You're one more degree away from sticking to your chair and becoming part of it forever. What do? In the modern world, the answer is simple. You crank the AC. You buy a fan with 47 speed settings and a built-in aromatherapy diffuser. You shout, "Alexa, fix my life," and a robotic breeze responds, possibly scented with eucalyptus. Oh, and your fan has Bluetooth. Because, for reasons unclear, your cooling appliance now needs a software update. What happens if you don't install it? Unknown. Maybe it joins a cult. But once upon a time, long before remote controls, electricity, or the phrase climate crisis, cooling down required creativity. Real, desperate, sweaty creativity. You see, long before humans figured out how to split the atom or swipe right, we had one primal urge: get air moving. Somehow, anyhow, whether by leaf, feather, or sheer panic. And thus, the humble fan was born. You might think the fan is boring, just a tool to move air and knock over your drink if you angle it wrong. But it's so much more. The fan is the unsung hero of human survival, the breezy sidekick in our long, sweaty journey through history. This is not just a story about fans. It's a tale of luxury, of innovation, of humans refusing to sweat in silence. From golden feathered fans carried by servants to dangerously exposed metal blades spinning in old factories like death frisbees, fans have seen it all. They've been weapons, status symbols, communication tools, fashion statements, battle gear, and yes, mosquito deterrents. They've cooled queens, emperors, factory workers, and probably at some point, a chicken. Don't fact check that, just go with it. Let's blow through 4,000 years of history. Let's talk about ancient civilizations, imperial artisans, European court drama, Victorian engineering disasters, and the Wi-Fi-enabled monstrosities we now keep next to our beds. This is the story of the fan, deceptively simple, historically fabulous, occasionally dangerous. And whether you're in a palace, a cubicle, or your third hour stuck in traffic with no AC, just know that your suffering is part of a proud, breezy tradition. Let's begin where it all started. Not in a lab, but under the scorching sun of ancient Egypt, where the fan wasn't a device, it was a dude with a leaf. Let's set the scene. You're in ancient Egypt, somewhere around 1500 BCE. The Nile glistens like a mirage of hope. The air is so dry, your eyeballs squeak when you blink. The sun, a giant, judgmental orb that roasts everything beneath it, like it's auditioning for Hell's Kitchen. And you're sweaty, sticky, probably wearing linen. You don't even know what deodorant is. You're melting faster than a wax tablet, left out at noon. But wait, what's that? A soft, rhythmic breeze caresses your face. Your armpits sigh with gratitude. You glance to the side, and there it is, your personal human fan. Yes, the first fans weren't mechanical marvels or plastic props. They were people, actual human beings whose sole job was to stand near someone important and wave something vaguely leaf-shaped over them, all day long. And no, not the enthusiastic, screaming kind of fan who camp outside concerts, holding glitter posters. These were the "here's a palm leaf, Try not to drop it while your master naps kind of fans. If you were a pharaoh, high priest, or someone who casually dropped the phrase, "My tomb is going to be massive," you didn't just survive the heat, you dominated it. Why settle for sweating when you could hire someone else to be exhausted on your behalf? These fanners weren't just random peasants with strong wrists either. They were often chosen for their endurance, discretion, and ability to stand perfectly still for hours while pretending to enjoy it. Being a human fan was less about elegance and more about upper arm strength and existential patience. But not all fans were mere palm leaves. Oh no. The higher you climbed the social pyramid, pun fully intended, the fancier your breeze delivery system became. Some fans were made with ostrich feathers, because nothing screams elite like molting birds. Others were carved from ivory, or plated with gold, or inlaid with gems. Just in case the sun didn't already blind you, they'd make sure the accessories did. The most iconic example, King Tutankhamun's burial chamber. Among his treasures, archaeologists found 5 ceremonial fans, each one more extra than the last. We're talking gold handles, elaborate featherwork, and inscriptions like, "Tut cooler than you," since 1332 BCE. Okay, maybe not that exact wording, but the vibes were regal. And these weren't just decorations, they were symbols of divine authority. Being fanned wasn't about cooling off, it was about status. If someone was waving feathers over your face while you lounged around drinking beer, yes, beer was an Egyptian staple. It told the world, this person is important, possibly a god, or at least very good at pretending to be one. Even in religious ceremonies, fans made appearances, not to waft the scent of incense, though that was a nice bonus, but to literally move sacred air. Imagine being so revered that even the air around you had to be curated. In fact, the role of fan-bearer was so significant, it sometimes appeared in titles. That's right. Fan-bearer on the right of the king was an actual position, recorded in hieroglyphs. You weren't just a breeze provider, you were royal furniture with a job title. And if you played your feathers right, you could gain serious influence in court. Now, to be clear, these fans weren't effective in the way we think of fans today. They didn't oscillate. They didn't hum comfortingly in the background. They didn't even plug into walls. They were, essentially, slow-motion arm workouts that only the wealthy could afford to outsource. And the people doing the fanning, often slaves or low-ranking servants, who spent hours under the same sun as their masters, without the benefits of the fan they were swinging. That's right. Ancient Egypt invented the first cooling inequality. The breeze gap was real, but fans weren't limited to palaces and tombs. Art from the New Kingdom shows women carrying portable fans while walking, which means some high-status Egyptians had travel fans. These were probably the ancestors of modern handheld folding fans, although instead of folding, they were stiff, flat, and full of feathers. Imagine carrying a delicate swan on a stick, and if you're wondering whether these fans helped with bugs, yes, actually. Egypt was swarming with flies and mosquitoes. Fanning kept them away, at least from the pharaoh. You'd still be a blood buffet. So, what have we learned? Ancient Egyptians were hot. Instead of inventing cooling devices, they invented job positions to delegate the sweating. Fans were less about temperature control and more about social control. Gold fans are cool. Human fans, less so, unless you're the one being fanned. By the time King Tut was laid to rest, fanned by symbolic feathers for eternity, the message was clear. Even the afterlife better come with excellent air circulation, because even in death, some people just refuse to sweat. Fast forward a few thousand years, and a few thousand miles east. You're now in ancient China. The climate is still steamy, but this time, you're not getting fanned by Steve the sweat-swinging servant. No sir, you're a cultured citizen of the Tang dynasty, and you've just pulled out the hottest accessory this side of the Great Wall, the folding fan. Let's talk about fanvolution. While other civilizations were content with flapping giant leaves like tropical chickens, the Chinese took a look at the situation and said, "This is a job for geometry. Enter the folding fan, a device so smart it's basically the smartphone of ancient East Asia. Portable? Check. Stylish? Absolutely. Useful? In spades. If the palm leaf fan was a stone tablet, the folding fan was a MacBook Air with calligraphy. Though fixed, rigid fans had existed in China for centuries. It wasn't until the Song dynasty, 960-1279 CE, that folding fans started really catching on. borrowed, ironically, from Japan, who may have borrowed it from Korea, who may have borrowed it from aliens. History's a little fuzzy there. What we do know is China perfected the fan. Like, really perfected it. Chinese artisans didn't just make fans, they crafted them. They painted landscapes, poems, and delicate scenes of birds being dramatic onto them. Fans became miniature scrolls with every flick of the wrist revealing a new chapter in someone's romantic woes or a majestic crane flying over existential dread. They weren't just used to cool off, they were used to show off. But it was in Japan where the folding fan truly became an entire cultural personality. Let's zoom into Heian-era Japan. The aristocracy was obsessed with etiquette, poetry, and looking mildly bored, while wearing 32 layers of silk. In this world, the folding fan, called the sensu, was both accessory and subtle communicator. Forget texting. If you liked someone, you didn't slide into their DMs. You flicked your fan open mid-dance and let the breeze do the flirting. Women would cover their faces with fans not just to be coy, but to keep up the illusion that their emotions were made of mist and moonlight. And men? Well, they had fan swagger too. A gentleman might casually tap his fan against his sleeve to signal disinterest, or use it to hide his dismay when his poem only got a 7/10 at the poetry slam. The fan became an extension of the soul, and by soul we mean anxiety, flirtation, and passive aggression. But fans weren't just dainty frills fluttering through a tea garden. Oh no. Enter the samurai. These guys were slicing through battlefields, dealing with treacherous politics, and still finding time to accessorize, because why not be lethal and fashionable? The samurai carried a fan called the gunsen, aka the war fan. This was no flimsy feather flapper. It was made of wood and metal, designed to withstand battle conditions, and if necessary, a poorly timed ambush. The gunsen could be used to signal commands on the field. Waving it one way meant advance, another meant retreat. Holding it up meant I have no idea what I'm doing, but it looks cool, okay? Maybe not that one officially, but the drama was real, and if someone got too close, you could whack them with it. That's right. This was the first multi-tool in Japanese military history. It's like if you took a folding chair, a whiteboard, and a slapstick comedy prop, and turned it into a status symbol. But war wasn't the only place fans got fancy. In the art of kabuki and no theatre, fans became literal props. A dancer could represent a bird, a wave, or an existential crisis, simply by the way they moved their fan. Entire scenes unfolded with no dialogue, just fluttering silk and suspicious eye contact. And the language of fans? That was a thing too. In both China and Japan, certain fan gestures were packed with meaning. Tilted a certain way, a fan could indicate shyness, anger, or this tea ceremony is dragging on, and I would like to fake my own death. By the Edo period in Japan, fans weren't just for the elite. Merchants, geishas, sumo wrestlers, everyone had a fan, and they all meant something. Even the shape varied. Some were round uchiwa, some were folding sensu, and some were big enough to double as a tent in a pinch. Fans were used in festivals, parades, and even in ritual exorcisms, because nothing says evil spirit be gone like waving lacquered bamboo in its general direction. Meanwhile in China, scholars used fans as intellectual flexes. If you had bad handwriting, too bad, your fan exposed it. If you were a poet, you best believe your verse was going on your fan, where every breeze came with a side of literature. In short, the fan wasn't just a fan, it was a statement. It told the world who you were, what you felt, what your rank was, and if you were a samurai, whether or not you were about to smack someone. So next time you open a folding fan, remember, you're not just cooling down, you're participating in a 1,000-year-old conversation about power, elegance, and the occasional tactical head injury. Because sometimes, the sharpest blade folds like origami. By the 16th century, fans fluttered their way across the Mediterranean into Europe, like dramatic little birds migrating for the fashion season. And oh boy, Europe took one look at these elegant, exotic air movers, and collectively said, yes, this is the thing now. The Renaissance had arrived, and nothing screamed sophistication quite like holding a delicately painted fan in one hand, while judging someone across a candlelit banquet table. The fan had officially become the power accessory of Europe. Not only could it cool you down, it could cool down an entire room just by the shade it threw. Let's set the scene. It's the court of Queen Elizabeth I. You're wearing a gown so massive, it has its own zip code. Your wig is tall enough to interfere with migrating birds, and your ruffled collar could double as a satellite dish. The air is thick with sweat, suspicion, and at least 6 layers of perfume trying and failing to mask the 1500s favourite scent. Eau de unwashed nobility, and in your hand, a fan. Not just any fan, a gilded, embroidered, possibly bedazzled fan made of silk, lace, or chicken feathers, dyed the colour of royalty. It's like carrying around your own personal art gallery, but one that could also be used to send passive-aggressive messages or mask your horror at someone's garlic breath. But let's not pretend this was just about cooling off. Oh no, this was politics. This was courtship. This was espionage with flair. In a time when women weren't allowed to speak their minds, or in some places, even their vowels, they had to get creative. And so the fan language was born. A full-on, fluttering, flirty Morse code for the emotionally repressed. Want to tell a man you're interested? Don't say it. Touch your right cheek with the fan. Want to end a conversation? Fan slowly with your left hand. Want to tell your friend across the ballroom that Lord Henry's toupee is slipping? Snap the fan shut with just the right amount of side-eye. It was like texting. If texting involved hand cramps, formal training, and the risk of accidentally insulting someone's lineage. A few documented examples from the 18th century fan code include touching closed fan to lips, you may approach, twirling the fan in the right hand, I love another, letting it rest on the right cheek, yes, letting it rest on the left cheek, no, hitting someone with it, you just insulted me, or you stepped on my hem, and either way, you now have 5 seconds to flee. Some women trained extensively in this language, turning ballroom gatherings into low-stakes soap operas. 1 fan movement could start a flirtation. 2 could start a duel. 3, and you were engaged, married, and plotting your husband's downfall. And yes, Queen Elizabeth I herself was a certified fan fanatic. Her collection reportedly included fans made of ivory, tortoiseshell, ostrich feathers, and a deep-seated disdain for the Spanish. Some of her fans were so ornate, they needed their own entourage. And given that this was a woman who basically ruled an empire while being perpetually surrounded by people trying to marry her or kill her, the fan probably also worked as a very symbolic shield. You could say Elizabeth weaponized fashion before it was cool. Let's be clear. Fans weren't just tools of courtly elegance, they were a blatant display of class. If you were holding a fan in 17th century France or Italy, you were telling the world, I have the money, time, and personal hygiene staff to afford this. The fans themselves could be outrageously expensive. Handles made of ivory or mother of pearl, silk imported from the Far East, and paintings hand-done by artists who probably deserved to be working on cathedrals, not someone's portable flirtation machine. Some fans featured religious scenes, which meant you could flirt and pray at the same time. A kind of multitasking that 1500s etiquette absolutely adored. But let's not forget the smell situation. This was Europe before plumbing, deodorant, or the general concept of maybe I shouldn't wear this goatskin tunic for 12 straight days. A ball in midsummer could easily devolve into a scented battlefield, with every whiff a gamble. Perfume was the duct tape of the era, used on everything from wigs to handkerchiefs to small dogs and fans. Oh, they got soaked in it. Literally. Fans were often perfumed so their owners could wave away the human soup surrounding them. They served double duty as both temperature control and nasal self-defense systems. If you've ever wondered what it was like to smell a Renaissance dance hall, imagine a mix of lilacs, damp velvet, sheep, and shame. By the 18th century, the fan evolved into a social commentary tool. Fans were sometimes printed with satirical messages or political cartoons. Imagine pulling out your fan at a party and having it read, "Death to taxes," or Marie Antoinette's hair is a national security issue. It was peak sass, disguised as civility. In some cases, they even doubled as cheat sheets, printed with ballroom etiquette, dance steps, or even translations of French flirtations. Because nothing says, "I'm ready for love," like discreetly reading a printed guide, while fanning yourself into an intellectual frenzy. So to sum up, by the time fans hit Europe, they weren't just breezy, they were bold. They were your smartphone, perfume diffuser, social status badge, emotional translator, and emergency insult paddle, all rolled into one fashionable flutter. And unlike today's fans, which sit in the corner making sad white noise, these fans demanded attention. They told stories. They started drama. They made you look good while surviving the olfactory chaos that was early modern Europe. Next time you feel a summer breeze, just remember, in the 16th century, someone was probably getting married, insulted, or mildly judged, all through the subtle art of fan choreography. The 19th century. A time when humanity looked at its dainty hand fans and said, what if we added danger, noise, and just a dash of electrocution? Welcome to the Industrial Revolution, where steam puffed, gears cranked, coal smoked, and everything suddenly needed to go faster, even the breeze. Before this era, fans had been delicate tools of flirtation and fragrance warfare, but as factories rose like iron giants and cities filled with the sound of relentless progress, the fan evolved dramatically. No longer an elegant accessory for your drawing room, the fan was reborn in metal, muscle, and mayhem. The first industrial fans weren't exactly what you'd call subtle. They were massive, clunky contraptions with open gears, exposed blades, and the grace of a drunk octopus. Most were powered by steam engines, water wheels, or, because nobody had invented safety yet, leather belts spinning at warp speed. These early fans appeared in places like textile mills, coal mines, and railroad tunnels. Anywhere the air was thick with heat, smoke, or existential dread. The point wasn't comfort, it was survival. You didn't turn on the fan because it was hot. You turned it on because otherwise your lungs might unionize. Imagine standing in a 19th century mill, cotton dust clogging your pores, looms pounding like angry drums, and suddenly this enormous metal sunflower starts spinning next to your head. There's no cage, no warning label, no OSHA, just raw industrial optimism, and an open invitation to lose a finger if you sneeze too close. By the 1880s, electricity was the new hotness, and inventors were practically sprinting to see how fast they could bolt wires to things and pray for results. Enter Schuyler Scats Wheeler, a name that sounds like he invented either a fan or a cocktail. In 1882, Wheeler created the first electric fan, a tabletop unit, with exposed blades and the soft hum of imminent doom. These early electric fans were less cool breeze and more rotating guillotine with dreams of upward mobility. There were no guards, just metal blades spinning at blur speed, ready to scalp the careless or mildly curious. Still, people loved them, because when your alternative was fainting in a corset or suffocating in a factory, a little danger seemed downright refreshing. Fans quickly spread to offices, wealthy homes, and early department stores, becoming the crown jewel of modern convenience. They were loud, they were heavy, and they looked like something Frankenstein might use to dry his hair. But they moved air, and that was revolutionary. Nowhere did these mechanized monsters matter, more than in the industrial workplace. Imagine working a 12-hour shift in a steel mill, surrounded by molten metal, sweat, and the sound of someone coughing up black lung. In these environments, heat wasn't just uncomfortable, it was lethal. To keep workers alive long enough to exploit, many factories installed ceiling-mounted or wall-mounted fans, some powered by belts that ran along the ceiling, others by early electric motors, with all the subtlety of a jet engine. They didn't always work well, and when they did, they had side effects, like blowing dangerous dust directly into everyone's face. But hey, ventilation was ventilation, even if it doubled as a weaponized air tornado. Some clever inventors even started building portable electric fans, which weighed about as much as a small goat, and required 3 grown men to reposition. Still, these early portable fans were a godsend in places like printing presses, machine shops, and windowless office basements, where employees worked in suits, ties, and the ever-present risk of spontaneous combustion. By the turn of the 20th century, fans began to sneak into homes, especially the fancy ones, because nothing said bourgeois bliss like a massive brass desk fan that looked like it was built to interrogate spies. Manufacturers like General Electric, Emerson, and Westinghouse started cranking out fans that were, let's be honest, still terrifying, but now came with paint options. Some early models came with leather blades, which sounds cozy until it warps mid-spin, while others had fans encased in iron cages, presumably to give you a false sense of security, while still being loud enough to drown out a phonograph and half your thoughts. And here's the kicker. Many of these fans still work today. Those early 1900s machines were so overbuilt, they might outlive us all. Drop one off a building, plug it in, and it'll probably still hum like a bulldog with bronchitis. Eventually, safety caught up. Slowly, by the 1920s and 30s, protective grills became more common. Fans got smaller and sleeker, and people began to expect their cooling appliances not to try to kill them. Design also started to matter. Fans weren't just mechanical beasts anymore. They were furniture. A good fan now had to look sharp in your living room, not just blast air like a wind tunnel for industrial hamsters. But let's not forget, the industrial fan era wasn't just a technological leap, it was a total vibe shift. It marked the moment when humanity stopped waving air at itself like peasants and started harnessing electricity to bend the breeze to its will. Sure, it came with sparks, injuries, and the constant hum of possibly bad ideas, but it worked. Factories were bearable, offices were survivable, and home life? Slightly less sweaty, all thanks to a spinning blade with no safety manual and a very bad attitude. Take a moment, sit back, feel that gentle breeze grazing your cheeks. Maybe it's coming from a sleek Dyson, a humble box fan, or a dusty old clunker you found in your grandma's attic that sounds like it's whispering ancient secrets. Either way, you're part of a 4000-year-long struggle against sweat. From the moment humans realized air could move, and that moving air was better than still air, we've been chasing the wind like obsessed romantics, writing poetry about cool drafts and open windows. We've gone from ostrich feathers in the hands of slaves to Wi-Fi-enabled tower fans that sync with your phone, all in the name of not turning into puddles. Let's rewind, shall we? Once upon a time, ancient Egyptians used fans not as practical tools, but as status symbols. Gleaming golden palm leaf contraptions waved exclusively over the sweaty brows of royalty. You think you're hot waiting in line at Starbucks? Try wearing eyeliner and 20 pounds of jewelry under the Egyptian sun, while someone fans you with bird feathers. Then, in the East, fan culture evolved into an art form. In China and Japan, fans weren't just tools, they were poetry in motion. Folding fans, war fans, courtship fans, everything short of a tax fan, which, let's be honest, someone probably tried to invent. The samurai even turned fans into weapons, because when everything's an art, even air becomes a sword. Fast forward to Renaissance Europe, where fans became the Twitter of their time, used to send coded flirtations, dramatic eye rolls, and passive-aggressive breezes across the ballroom floor. And if that didn't work, a solid fan slap to the face conveyed just the right level of "I detest your wig, good sir." Then came the Industrial Revolution, when subtlety was tossed out a factory window. Fans got bigger, meaner, louder. With open blades and exposed gears, these things didn't just cool you, they threatened you into feeling cooler. Safety was optional, efficiency was king, and if your tie got caught in the motor, well, hopefully you had a backup tie. Eventually, electricity tamed the beast, and fans evolved into friendly household companions. Oscillating motors made them go wobble-wobble, designers made them look like UFOs, and suddenly, everyone could afford a personal breeze without risking decapitation. Cue the slow-motion sigh of relief. Today, fans have become smarter than most of us. They know when you enter a room. They adjust based on humidity. They whisper sweet nothings in your ear at night. Using sleep mode, you can talk to them. They listen. They might even be plotting. Who knows? At least they're cool about it. And through all of it, from ceremonial feather waving in tombs to airflow apps on your phone, there's one constant: humans absolutely hate being hot. That's what this whole fantastic journey has been about. Not just innovation, not just status, but the eternal universal dream of not sweating through your nice shirt before noon. Because in the end, fans represent something beautifully human. They don't cook food, build bridges, or fly to Mars, but they make us feel just a little better, a bit more comfortable, a touch more dignified while the sun tries to roast us alive. So the next time you turn on that fan, whether it's a tiny USB-powered gizmo or a ceiling-mounted turbine that sounds like it could lift a helicopter, pause for a second. Consider the dusty legacy behind that simple breeze. You are the heir to a grand, slightly ridiculous empire of air. You stand in the cool, whirring shadow of pharaohs, samurai, Victorian duchesses, and factory workers who all just wanted to not be sticky. You might not be nobility. You might not have golden feathers or servants dedicated to waving palm leaves over your increasingly damp forehead, but you have a remote control, you have oscillation, and by Osiris, you have airflow on demand. And honestly, that's not a bad place to be. So breathe easy, my modern breeze connoisseur. The air is cool, the journey is long, and the fan, like civilization itself, is still spinning. Humans are a remarkable species. We've built the pyramids, sent rockets to the moon, and somehow figured out how to make pizza crust out of cheese. Because yes, science really does have its priorities. Our innovation knows no bounds, and every century, decade, and even year brings new inventions designed to make our lives better, easier, or at least more interesting. But, and this is a big but, we also have a spectacular track record of inventing things that make you ask, wait, why? Sometimes the answer is because someone thought it was a good idea, and other times, well, no one really knows. These are the inventions that shouldn't have left the drawing board, the prototypes that make you question humanity's collective decision-making skills, and the gadgets that technically work, but not in a way anyone sane would want. Welcome to history's most useless inventions. They tried. Oh boy, they tried. A celebration of humanity's strangest, most pointless, and sometimes downright hazardous inventions. We're diving into those moments when brilliant minds met terrible judgment and created something so baffling, so impractical, it makes you grateful for the plain old toaster. Now before we go pointing fingers, remember innovation is trial and error. Thomas Edison probably burned through thousands of filaments before inventing the light bulb, and maybe some of these inventions are like those filaments, necessary failures on the path to success. But that doesn't stop us from laughing at the time someone thought a radioactive face cream was a good beauty hack, or that strapping a jet engine to a bicycle was a brilliant idea for commuting. The beauty of these inventions is that they capture the spirit of human creativity at its most enthusiastic. They tell stories of people who dared to dream outside the box, even if the box was more of a cardboard disaster zone, because for every smartphone and electric car there's an amphibious bicycle that can't float, a mechanical leech holder that's mostly just uncomfortable, or a hat that cools your head by blowing, well, something vaguely like air. In this journey, we'll visit the radioactive obsession of the early 20th century, where people believed glowing things made them healthier. Spoiler alert, they didn't. We'll see Victorian attempts at hygiene that sound charming until you realize they mostly solved problems no one had. Then buckle up for transportation inventions so wild they might as well have been designed by cartoon villains, followed by the animal-aided contraptions that remind us how badly pets hate our ideas. We'll peek into future tech dreams from the past, because sometimes the future looked more like a bad sci-fi movie than the sleek, connected world we imagined. And of course, no collection of useless inventions would be complete without bizarre food-related contraptions, because why not make something edible that tastes terrible and solves no problem? This is not just a catalogue of failures, it's a reminder that progress is messy, weird, and often hilarious. The sheer variety of these inventions tells us something essential. Creativity doesn't always come with common sense, and sometimes the best way to move forward is to look back and say, what were they thinking? So, get ready for a whirlwind tour through history's engineering bloopers, human optimism, and the eternal hope that maybe the next invention will be a little less ridiculous. Because as much as we mock the past, these failures paved the way for the successes we enjoy today. And hey, next time your Wi-Fi cuts out or your phone autocorrects duck to something less polite, remember, it could be worse. You could be wearing a radioactive beauty mask while riding an amphibious bike powered by pigeons. Strap in, stay curious, and prepare to cringe and chuckle your way through inventions that deserve a place in the What Were They Thinking Hall of Fame. The early 20th century, a time of optimism, jazz music, and very little understanding of radiation poisoning. When scientists first isolated radium in the late 1800s, people looked at the glowing green substance and didn't think, that's terrifying. No, they said, how do I get that inside my body immediately? Welcome to the era where glow was the goal, and slow internal decay was just an unfortunate side effect. This was a time when anything radioactive wasn't feared. It was fashionable. If it glowed, it sold. If it didn't glow, slap some radium on it, and then sell it. Let's start with the radium water jar, or as I like to call it, the worst hydration decision of your life. The device was simple. Pour regular water into a ceramic jar laced with radium. Let it sit overnight, and voila, you've got yourself some radium water, also charmingly branded as liquid sunshine. Marketing didn't stop there. It promised to cure everything from arthritis to low energy, to the vague and Victorian-sounding general malaise. You were supposed to drink this stuff daily, sometimes by the gallon. The problem? Oh, just the bone death. Radium, as it turns out, doesn't just glow, it lodges itself into your bones and begins a slow-motion demolition project from the inside out. But hey, at least your water glowed in the dark like a haunted lava lamp. Then we had radioactive toothpaste, because apparently mint wasn't cutting it. Brands like Doramad and Thoradia. Yes, those were real advertised radium and thorium-infused toothpaste that stimulated the gums and made your smile more radiant. Technically true, your teeth were more radiant, as in they emitted actual radiation. Your mouth, the glow stick. Brushing your teeth became a nightly gamble. Sure, you had dazzling teeth, right before they fell out, but in the golden glow of scientific misunderstanding, people thought radioactive toothpaste was cutting-edge oral hygiene. Cleans while it irradiates could have been the tagline. Ironically, a few years later, dentists would be pulling the very teeth these products ruined. But hold on to your lead-lined hats, because we haven't reached the weirdest product yet. That honor goes to radium condoms. Yep, in case your love life wasn't dangerous enough already. These were touted as stimulating and energizing, and if you ever wanted the phrase, love is toxic, to become horrifically literal, congratulations. These weren't just misguided. They were a glowing death trap for your most vulnerable anatomy. The reasoning behind these radioactive romance aids. People genuinely believed that radium had rejuvenating, life-extending qualities. It was marketed as a sexual stimulant, because what screams intimacy, like ionizing radiation. Nothing spices up the mood like a low-dose cancer risk. To modern readers, all of this sounds like a cautionary tale, written by a horror movie villain. But back then, radium was a celebrity element. It glowed. It was rare. Marie Curie had discovered it. And she was a Nobel Prize-winning genius. So, how bad could it be? Spoiler. Very. Marie Curie literally died of radiation exposure, and she invented the stuff. Let's not forget the wealthy socialites who made radioactive products part of their daily health regimen. One famous example, Eben Byers, a millionaire industrialist and poster child for what happens when you drink over 1,000 bottles of radium water. He swore by it until his jaw fell off. No, seriously, it disintegrated. His autopsy remains one of the most radioactive human remains ever studied, which is an achievement, I guess. By the 1930s, the party was finally over. The glowing miracle cure started to look less miraculous when people began, dying. Public health officials slowly realized that sipping radioactive cocktails and brushing your teeth with death paste wasn't the best idea. Regulations followed. Companies quietly removed the radium labels, pivoted their marketing, and hoped nobody asked too many questions. The tragedy is that these inventions weren't created by evil mad scientists twirling their mustaches. They were made by people who genuinely thought they were helping. It was science. It was innovation. It was progress. It was, unfortunately, also a radioactive disaster waiting to happen. And yet, you kind of have to admire the optimism, the raw, glowing enthusiasm of a time when no one truly grasped the dangers. But everyone wanted to be at the cutting edge, even if the edge was a Geiger counter screeching in the background. So the next time you're annoyed that your moisturizer doesn't glow in the dark, or your toothpaste doesn't make your gums tingle with questionable energy, remember, sometimes boring is better. Because nothing says bad idea like sipping glow juice while thinking, wow, I feel immortal. Now that we've survived the atomic skincare apocalypse, let's move on to something equally confusing but slightly less fatal. Victorian inventions. The Victorian era. A time of corsets, candlelight, and very questionable decisions about cleanliness. You might assume that an age known for industrial progress would also figure out basic hygiene. You would be wrong. Victorians were many things: poetic, inventive, and deeply committed to their mustaches. But sanitary? Not exactly. This was a period when bathing was still considered suspicious, fresh air was feared, and doctors recommended you air out a wound by slapping a raw onion on it and praying. So when it came to hygiene inventions, the bar was low, subterranean, really, and yet they still managed to limbo under it. Let's begin with the crown jewel of slightly terrifying cleanliness, the mechanical leech holder. Because why settle for putting a leech on your face the normal way when you could turn it into an elaborate apparatus? You see, bloodletting wasn't just a medieval quirk, it made a grand comeback in the 19th century. And what better way to drain your fluids than with style? The mechanical leech holder looked like something between a mousetrap and a torture device. It held live leeches in position for precise application, which is a polite way of saying leech clamp for your eyebrows. These were used for everything from headaches to gout to lady hysteria. A diagnosis so vague it basically meant a woman is upset, and we don't know why. But here's the kicker. Victorians thought bloodletting cleaned the body, like emptying out the bad vibes via invertebrate. This wasn't hygiene as we know it. It was more of a trust fall with medieval biology, and yet they engineered devices to make it more convenient, as if the real problem was just not having enough leech accessories. If that doesn't make you queasy, let's talk about armpit fans. Tiny, flapping contraptions strapped under your arms to circulate air, where deodorant feared to tread. The Victorian solution to body odor, mechanized breeze. These were literal wingmen, if you will, fluttering like anxious butterflies beneath layers of wool and lace. If you ever wanted to feel like your pits were trying to take flight, this was the technology for you. Now, these weren't exactly mass-produced. They were more of a rich person oddity, something you'd wear if you had too many servants and not enough common sense. But they existed. Victorian inventors took a long, sweaty look at the human underarm and said, "Yes, let us engineer for this." Meanwhile, soap was still seen as a luxury item, and water was often avoided because it opened the pores to disease. So again, priorities. And speaking of priorities, we have to talk about the most absurdly niche invention of the era, the mustache cup. At first glance, it's just a teacup. Look closer, and you'll notice a porcelain ledge built into the rim, complete with a slot for sipping. Why? To protect a gentleman's waxed mustache from the horrors of tea steam. Victorians were deeply serious about facial hair. A mustache wasn't just a style, it was a statement. It told the world, I'm respectable, I might duel you, and I absolutely will not let Earl Grey wilt my whiskers. The mustache cup became a symbol of masculine dignity. Never mind that people were dying from tainted milk and cholera outbreaks. By God, their facial hair would remain crisp. In an age before reliable plumbing or refrigeration, protecting your mustache from liquid aggression was somehow a top priority. And while it sounds ridiculous now, these cups were a huge hit. There were entire gift sets marketed toward young bachelors who wanted to maintain that rakish curl of manly sophistication while still enjoying a hot beverage. Now let's be fair, the Victorians were trying, sort of. Hygiene as we understand it today, washing hands, brushing teeth, scrubbing your body without medical leeches, wasn't mainstream yet. Germ theory was still a baby idea, and many doctors thought disease came from miasma or bad air. So people invented all kinds of nonsense to protect themselves from the invisible, misunderstood dangers of the world, while actively ignoring the real ones. The result? A golden age of overcomplication. Why make hygiene simpler when you could make it so much weirder? Want to be clean? Strap on a fan. Got a headache? Unleash the leeches. Drinking tea? Guard the stash. It was a world of etiquette, engineering, and deeply misplaced confidence. And while we laugh now, you have to appreciate the sheer commitment. These weren't half-baked ideas. They were fully porcelain-baked and leather-strapped contraptions designed with the solemn goal of improving life. They just also happen to be utterly bonkers. So the next time your electric toothbrush feels a little over-designed, just remember, it's still less complicated than a mechanical leech hat. Now that we've cleaned up the Victorians, sort of, let's roll into the 20th century with a bit more horsepower and a lot less practicality. Humans have always dreamed of better, faster, cooler ways to get around. We invented the wheel, we built trains that crossed continents and planes that touched the edge of space. And then, somewhere between practical progress and why does that have a propeller on it, we invented this stuff. Welcome to the realm of transportation's greatest failures, the kind of inventions that ask, not, does it work, but how on earth did this get a patent? These weren't just engineering missteps, they were full-blown, smoke-spewing, speed limit-defying fiascos. Strap in, and maybe wear flame-retardant pants. Let's start with a personal favourite, the amphibious bicycle. Because sometimes you're riding along and suddenly think, what if I could pedal directly into this lake? Born from the noble dream of seamlessly transitioning from land to water, the amphibious bike was designed to float, paddle, and generally embarrass its rider. Imagine your standard bicycle, but now with inflatable pontoons strapped to it like pool floaties for a vehicle with self-esteem issues. Most designs required the rider to stop, attach the pontoons manually, and then reconfigure the wheels into paddle propellers, using a mechanism that absolutely did not work as advertised. The result? You rode into the water like a majestic dolphin and immediately sank like a very confused toaster. One British model from the early 20th century claimed it could cross the English Channel. It didn't. It barely crossed a puddle. Amphibious bicycles were essentially wet disappointments on wheels. Too slow on land, too panicked on water, and perfect for anyone who wanted to feel like a failed spy in a Charlie Chaplin routine. But at least they had two wheels, not like the mono wheel. Humanity's boldest one-wheeled mistake. Picture a giant metal hoop. Now put a person inside that hoop, like a hamster in a very stylish death trap. Add a motor, or sometimes just pedals, and pray you don't roll into a parked car. Monowheels have been popping up since the 19th century, usually invented by eccentrics, with too much time, not enough friction, and a burning desire to be the only person on the street, both moving and dizzy. They had one critical flaw: steering. There wasn't any. You turned mostly by leaning, and hoping the laws of physics felt generous that day. Braking? An optional feature at best. Most monowheel enthusiasts learned this the hard way, when they ended up rolling down hills like a giant steel donut with internal screaming. One famous prototype in the 1930s could go up to 90 kilometers per each, 56 miles per hour, which sounds impressive, until you realize it had zero lateral stability. That's right, it could go fast, in a straight line, if the road was flat, and you had no need for turning, stopping, or dignity. But if you really wanted to test the limits of logic and human combustibility, nothing topped the early jetpack prototypes. The 1950s and 60s were an era of wild optimism. We were going to have flying cars, robot butlers, and of course, jetpacks that let you escape traffic by becoming airborne traffic. The original designs were little more than metal backpacks strapped with rocket fuel. Some ran on peroxide, others on compressed gas, and nearly all of them ended their test runs in flames, smoke, or brief hospitalization. In theory, you'd lift off majestically like a futuristic superhero. In practice, you scorched your backside, hovered for 12 seconds, and face-planted into the nearest bush, while the crowd applauded your bravery and lack of insurance. The military loved the idea of jetpacks. What soldier wouldn't want to leap over a river or fly up a cliff? But then reality kicked in. They were loud, wildly unstable, and had a fuel range of approximately one football field, assuming no wind or weight or movement of any kind. The most infamous example, the Bell rocket belt, was demonstrated at the 1964 World's Fair. It looked awesome. The pilot soared into the air, hovered, then landed gracefully on a platform. What the audience didn't see was that the test area had to be specially designed. The pilot trained for months, and two people off-screen were holding their breath and a fire extinguisher. Jetpacks, in short, were, and still are, the ultimate case of don't try this at home unless your home is made of Kevlar. What ties all these inventions together? A beautiful, ridiculous optimism. People looked at bikes, wheels, and gravity and thought, I can do better. And maybe they could have, if their designs didn't actively try to murder the user in slow motion. So yes, These vehicles failed, spectacularly, but they failed with style, flair, and often literal flames. And there's something kind of noble about that, because transportation, at its heart, is about moving forward. Even if you're only moving forward for 3 seconds before veering into a duck pond. Humans have always had a complicated relationship with animals. We adore them, feed them, put sweaters on them, and occasionally enlist them in military operations or lawn care. Yes, somehow someone looked at a pigeon and thought, this bird is ready for war, or saw a cat and thought, that's basically a lawnmower. Welcome to the bizarre world of animal-adjacent inventions, where man meets beast, and beast silently judges man's terrible ideas. Let's begin with the masterpiece of misguided genius known as Project Pigeon, a real, serious military plan during World War II that asked the question, what if we trained pigeons to guide bombs? Because clearly, when fighting fascism, the best option is tactical bird brains. The concept, dreamed up by psychologist B.F. Skinner, yes, but Skinner, involved placing trained pigeons inside the nose cone of a bomb. No, they weren't the payload. They were the navigation system. The idea was that these pigeons would be trained to peck at an image of the target. The more accurate their pecks, the more the bomb's internal fins would adjust, steering it toward its explosive destiny. In theory, the bird would track a ship or enemy structure right up until impact. In reality, the pigeon was trapped in a vibrating metal tube, hurtling through the sky at 250 miles per hour, presumably wondering where it all went wrong. Despite extensive training, including elaborate reward systems involving food pellets, the project never quite took off. While the birds were shockingly good at pecking targets in calm laboratory settings, the US military eventually decided that perhaps entrusting their high-stakes explosives to avian instinct wasn't ideal. Also, there was a growing concern that a startled pigeon might suddenly decide to follow a more interesting shape, like a cloud, or its own reflection. Now, let's flap over to dog goggles, an invention born not of aggression but of misguided love. During World War II, people weren't just worried about themselves, they were worried about their furry companions too. Enter dog goggles for air raids. These were tiny protective glasses designed to shield canine eyes from the blinding flash of explosions or dust from falling debris. The idea was noble, the execution unconvincing. Dogs, as it turns out, don't enjoy having goggles strapped to their faces, especially not during a bombing. Some military dogs were trained to tolerate them, usually with the same enthusiastic compliance of a toddler being handed broccoli. Others simply shook them off mid-run, or worse, chewed them to death as a form of silent protest. There are even photos of bewildered terriers in tiny helmets and goggles, looking like steampunk pilots preparing for a biplane duel with squirrels. And while the goggles didn't harm the dogs, they didn't help much either. When bombs fell, it wasn't retinal exposure that was the problem. It was, bombs. But nothing, and we mean nothing, matches the Victorian brainwave that gave us the cat-powered lawnmower. Let's break this down. In the 19th century, some highly confident gentlemen theorized that cats could be trained to run on a wheel, like a hamster, connected to a series of gears that turned a rotating blade, thus mowing your lawn via feline energy. The blueprint literally shows a large cat wheel hooked up to a bladed drum, powered by, quote, the natural instincts of the animal. So, your job was to place a cat inside this oversized hamster wheel, let it run, and watch your grass get trimmed in the process. Now let's review everything wrong with this idea. First, cats. The famously cooperative, eager-to-please species known for obeying human commands without question. Oh wait, that's dogs. Cats will stare directly at you while knocking your drink off a table. They will not jog obediently in a circle for the sake of your lawn. Second motivation. The inventor suggested that a mouse could be dangled in front of the cat to inspire locomotion. So now we've upgraded from useless to an ethical minefield. You've trapped a cat in a wheel, suspended a terrified mouse in front of it, and expect this whole thing to not end in trauma and blood. Bravo, Victorian science. Bravo. Unsurprisingly, there is no record of this invention ever working in real life. Mostly because trying to make cats do cardio while operating sharp blades is a recipe for lawsuits and tetanus. But it didn't stop there. Other historical attempts to make animals do human jobs include pig-powered turnspits in kitchens, ferret cable pullers, used to run wires through tight spaces, and even messenger crows, though most just got distracted and flew off to yell at random people in parks. So why did humans keep trying? Was it laziness? Optimism? A misplaced belief that our pets secretly wanted to be useful members of society? Probably all three. The truth is, we've always seen animals as potential extensions of our own tools and technologies. But there's a difference between training a dog to fetch your slippers and assigning it a tactical bombing mission. Somewhere along the line, practicality got traded for pipe dreams and a lot of animal side-eye. So if you ever feel bad about having a weird idea, just remember, someone once tried to use pigeons to guide explosives, cats to mow the lawn, and dogs to survive air raids in fashion eyewear. And those ideas made it far enough to get drawn up, tested, and sometimes even funded. Let's go back in time to the future. Picture it, the 1930s. The world is still recovering from the Great Depression, jazz is thriving, and everyone's convinced that by the year 2000, we'll be living in space colonies and wearing jumpsuits made of tinfoil. The era was buzzing with wide-eyed predictions of hovercrafts, home robots, and meals in pill form. But when it came time to actually invent the future, people missed badly. Welcome to Future Tech Fails, the retro futuristic inventions that were supposed to change your life, and mostly just ruined your dignity. Let's start with TV glasses, an invention that asked, what if television but directly on your face? Long before Oculus or Google Glass, someone in the 1950s thought it would be a fantastic idea to strap a miniature television screen to your head using a pair of bulky, wire-laden goggles. These weren't sleek, they were enormous. Imagine taking a toaster, slicing it in half, and tying it to your eyeballs with a belt. These TV glasses were marketed as the ultimate convenience. Watch your shows while lying down. No more sitting up like a peasant. The ads promised portability, immersion, and innovation. What they delivered was neck pain, temporary blindness, and the constant threat of electrocution. The prototype had wires trailing from your head, like you were defusing a bomb, and the display resolution was roughly 2 potatoes taped to a flashlight. Watching TV through them made everything look like a blurry surveillance feed from a haunted warehouse. And let's not forget the social angle. Nothing says approachable like a man sweating into a head-bound TV rig, smiling eerily while blinking at static. It's the tech equivalent of wearing night vision goggles to a dinner party. Moving on to an absolute classic, the portable record player chest rig. It's exactly what it sounds like. Some genius decided the best way to bring music with you was to strap a vinyl turntable directly to your torso. That's right. Just fasten a spinning record to your chest, point the needle at your sternum, and start walking. What could go wrong? Well, everything. First off, vinyl records hate movement. Even the gentlest bump causes the needle to skip. Now imagine trying to walk down the street, with each footstep turning your jazz record into glitchcore. The vibrations alone turned every song into a remix. Louis Armstrong would start singing, "What a Wonderful Whir Skirt. World." Then there's the mechanical element. The turntable had to remain perfectly level while the user moved, which required a complex harness system that made you look like a human phonograph Batman villain. Bonus, it weighed about 20 pounds. So if you ever wanted to listen to music and suffer from spinal compression, this was your moment. Also, battery life, laughable. You'd get maybe 20 minutes of scratchy music before the thing sputtered out, leaving you sweaty, confused, and now also wearing a completely useless chest-mounted frisbee. But none of this compares to the most gloriously ridiculous invention of the bunch, the refrigerated hat. Yes, a hat that refrigerated your head. The inventor behind this 1940s fever dream, possibly suffering from an overheated brain himself, claimed it was the perfect solution for staying cool in hot weather. The design included a metal-lined helmet, a series of ice compartments, and in some versions, even small fans. Let's take a second to think this through. You're already hot, so your plan is to put metal on your head, fill it with ice, and trap it under a fabric dome. Sure, you'll feel a fleeting wave of coolness right before your scalp starts dripping, your eyebrows freeze, and condensation begins pouring into your eyes. And heaven forbid the ice should melt too fast. You'd be walking around with Niagara Falls pouring down your back. Add in the weight of the hat, because nothing screams refreshing like carrying a glacier on your skull, and you've got a one-way ticket to Chiropractor City. The hat also had the unintended side effect of making wearers look like prototype astronauts who failed the final exam. If the heat didn't get you, the stairs definitely would. All three of these futuristic inventions suffer from the same fatal flaw. They assumed that slapping new tech onto the human body would automatically make things better. The reality? You got sore necks, public humiliation, and several near-miss electrocutions. But let's not be too harsh. These inventors were dreamers. They looked at the world and thought, we can do better, we can be cooler, we can be the future. They were wrong, but they tried. And honestly, isn't that what progress is all about? Trying something completely absurd, watching it fail spectacularly, and then having a good laugh before returning to the drawing board. Hopefully, while not wearing a record player on your ribcage. Sleep, that sacred, precious escape from the chaos of daily life. A time to drift into dreams, recharge your soul, and gently reset your brain. Unless you lived in the golden age of bizarre sleep, aids where rest was something to be aggressively attacked with springs, metal arms, and the occasional face smother. Welcome to the era where people didn't just want better sleep, they were willing to let machines violently intervene to get it. Let's start with the alarm bed that tosses you out. A marvel of mechanical hostility. The concept was simple. People had a hard time waking up, so rather than use a gentle chime or even the classic screeching alarm clock, why not construct a bed that physically yeets you onto the floor like a malfunctioning amusement park ride? When the alarm sounded, the bed would flip upward, tilt sideways, or in some especially cruel versions, drop the sleeper through a hidden trapdoor, like an Elizabethan execution device. Imagine peacefully dreaming of clouds and kittens, only to be catapulted into drywall at 6 a.m. because your mattress just had enough of your nonsense. And no, there were no safety measures. This wasn't a gentle nudge. This was a wake-up-or-die level of urgency. Bones were bruised, relationships were tested. One inventor even proudly claimed the device could eject the heaviest of sleepers. Yes, because nothing says great morning like dislocating your shoulder to get to work on time. Next up, nap desks with face holes, otherwise known as workplace embarrassment furniture, designed for office workers who wanted to sneak in a quick nap without technically leaving their desk. These desks came equipped with soft headrests and a strategically placed hole to bury your face into like a guilt-ridden ostrich. The idea was ergonomic, they said, efficient, a way to blend productivity with comfort. But what it really looked like was someone quietly sobbing into a wooden box, face down like they'd just been fired in the middle of a Sudoku puzzle. And heaven help you if you drooled into the face hole. Some models came with absorbent material, which is a polite way of saying you now own a nap sponge full of sadness. And then, of course, we must address the pièce de résistance, anti-snoring devices that basically just punch you. You'd think, with all the modern science available, we'd come up with something sleek and elegant to stop snoring. But in the 20th century, we went with mechanical violence. One device involved a headband connected to a microphone that monitored your snores. When you got too loud, it activated a small robotic arm that slapped your face. Yes, it was an actual slap, the kind you usually reserve for soap operas and cheating poker players. Another version went full mad scientist. It wrapped around your torso, and when it detected deep snores, it would inflate a bladder under your ribs to nudge you awake, not gently. Think internal balloon uppercut. Nothing like gasping awake at 3 a.m. with a sudden case of the phantom elbows. There were leg bands that shocked you, neck collars that beeped, and one particularly cursed invention, a vibrating pillow that pulsed like a haunted phone every time you exhaled. Forget restful sleep. This was boot camp for people who just wanted to nap without being harassed by robot overlords. Now, you might ask, why would anyone use these things? Well, desperation. Partners tired of nightly chainsaw noises. People scared of sleep apnea before it was fully understood. And some folks, bless their sleep-deprived hearts, genuinely believed being punched awake was a sign of progress. But what all these inventions forgot is the very essence of rest, comfort. They turned the act of sleeping into a kind of gladiator match between human softness and cruel innovation. Your body wanted peace. Your devices wanted a boxing match. Guess who won? Let's not forget the psychological toll. Imagine explaining these gadgets to a roommate or partner. No, it's perfectly normal. This hat just chokes me if I breathe too deeply. Or showing up to work with face prints and bruises because your mattress decided to launch you into Tuesday. The future wasn't just uncomfortable, it was humiliating. Yet, somehow, These inventions were made with the best intentions. That's the most beautiful and baffling part. They weren't designed by villains. They were born from the sincere belief that a better night's sleep was worth a few electrical jolts, a little bruising, and maybe losing a tooth. But they were wrong. So wrong. So if you're lying in bed tonight, enjoying the silence, the plush pillows, and the miracle of not being slapped by your nightstand, take a moment to thank the past for trying, and then thank it again for failing. Humans are adventurous eaters. We've braved fugu fish that could paralyze us, invented cheese that smells like burnt regret, and declared pumpkin spice a seasonal personality trait. But then came a golden era, not of culinary excellence, but of confusion. A time when flavor, function, and basic common sense were thrown into a blender and served lukewarm. Welcome to the world of food and drink inventions so bad they make gas station sushi look like Michelin star cuisine. Let's start with the infamous meat-flavored toothpaste. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. Brushing your teeth with the flavor of beef, bacon, or in one particularly troubling case, roast chicken. Supposedly developed for people who don't like mint, these pastes were aimed at carnivores who wanted to leave the house with breath that said, "I licked a barbecue grill," and let's not forget, toothpaste is meant to make your mouth feel fresh, invigorated, not like you've just eaten a cheeseburger and then immediately regretted it. The first brush stroke hits you with a nostalgic whiff of Denny's at 3 a.m., and the aftertaste lingers like a meat-scented ghost, refusing to move on. Now, in defense of these misguided tubes of regret, some versions were marketed for pets, but humans, being the curious raccoons we are, absolutely tried them. There are reviews, real ones. One user described it as like smearing Slim Jims on your gums. Another simply wrote, "Why?" Next up, coffee bean chewing gum. A solution to a problem nobody had. How can I get coffee in my system without drinking it, and also ruin my jaw in the process? The idea was born from the desire for portable caffeine, something you could pop in during meetings, workouts, or, presumably, interrogation sessions. Instead of brewing a cup of joe like a sane person, you just start gnawing on a brown rubbery pellet that tasted like the bottom of a burned espresso pot, and somehow still made your breath worse. The makers proudly claimed it had twice the caffeine of a normal cup of coffee. But at what cost? Your dignity? Your taste buds? The structural integrity of your molars? Chewing it didn't make you more alert. It just made you regret being awake at all. And unlike coffee, which whispers, "You can do this," coffee gum shouts, "You made a mistake." It also gave many users that lovely nervous jitters vibe, which pairs perfectly with the taste of bitter tire rubber and broken dreams. And then there's the pièce de resistance of poorly executed genius, the self-butter toast knife. This Frankenstein's breakfast utensil was pitched as the ultimate time saver, a butter knife that toasts while you spread. The blade heats up just enough to melt the butter as it touches the bread. What could go wrong? Everything. First, it required a built-in heating element, powered either by a battery that lasted maybe one use, or by plugging the knife into the wall, because nothing screams breakfast convenience like wielding a live electrical wire near a tub of margarine. It also didn't toast your bread evenly, or at all. Mostly it just smeared warm butter onto cold toast, while giving your fingers third-degree burns. The handle got hot, the blade got hotter, and the only thing getting cooked was your last nerve. There were even models that claimed to be smart knives, with sensors to detect optimal butter melting temperature, but this was a lie. A glorious, melty, crumb-covered lie. To recap, we had bacon toothpaste that made you fear oral hygiene, coffee gum that made you hate productivity, and a knife that turned your breakfast into a weaponized fire hazard. What do these all have in common? They were all trying to solve problems that did not exist. No one asked to brush with meat. No one looked at a cup of coffee and said, "If only this were chewy," and no one, literally no one, stood in their kitchen and thought, "This butter is slightly too cold. Time to plug in a serrated death wand." But beyond the burns and the bad breath, these inventions reveal something almost beautiful. A chaotic optimism, a belief that food should be faster, funkier, more futuristic, even if the result was a series of crimes against cuisine. We live in an age now where innovation means sushi burritos and AI-generated recipes, but let's never forget the pioneers who came before. The ones who tried to weaponize toast, flavor toothpaste like dinner, and convince us that chewing beans was the future. Their ideas didn't work, but they did make us laugh, and sometimes that's enough. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go gargle with something aggressively minty and unplug my breakfast utensils. Before air conditioning, before ceiling fans, and long before you got to press a remote control button labeled Turbo Breeze, humans had one dream: to move air around without having to lift their own sweaty limbs. It all started with slaves and palm leaves. Yes, the original fan was less innovation and more some poor guy standing behind a pharaoh, waving a leaf while questioning his life choices. And while this ancient setup technically worked, it wasn't exactly scalable. Enter human ingenuity. Stage left, armed with hats, pedals, flammable liquids, and zero understanding of basic safety protocols. Let's begin with the absolutely real, absolutely baffling fan hat. This was not a metaphorical hat. This was a literal piece of headwear with a small spinning fan mounted on top. Sometimes it was hand-cranked. Sometimes it ran on batteries. Occasionally, it was solar-powered, because nothing says eco-friendly innovation like looking like a confused weather vane in public. The hat fan was invented for those brave souls who said, "I want cool air, but I want it to hit me from directly above, and also give me mild whiplash." Unsurprisingly, these gadgets didn't exactly become fashion staples. Imagine going on a first date and realizing your romantic partner has a propeller where a fedora should be. It's not a vibe, it's a warning sign. But let's say you didn't want to wear your fan. What if, instead, you wanted to work out for your breeze? Enter the pedal-powered fan, the world's most ironic combination of sweat and salvation. These were exactly what they sound like. Stationary bikes or foot pedals hooked up to a small fan that would spin when you pedaled. The faster you worked, the cooler you got, in theory. In practice, it meant you had to exercise just to make the room slightly less unbearable. It was like building a sauna that only cooled down if you jogged inside it. Some were marketed as fitness motivators, combining cardio with natural wind. One ad even claimed, "It's like biking through the Alps." No, it was like biking through your living room, and still sweating profusely because your breeze engine was a glorified hamster wheel. And then there were the gasoline-powered fans. That's right. For a brief, glorious, probably OSHA-violating moment in history, someone looked at a hot room and said, "You know what this needs? Combustion." These machines were essentially small gas engines with fan blades attached, meaning every time you wanted to cool down, you had to fill up the tank and start an internal engine indoors, in the name of comfort. Sure, it moved air, but it also moved carbon monoxide, and the gentle hum of your average fan was replaced with the mechanical roar of a lawnmower having a bad day. You didn't fall asleep to it. You passed out from fumes. Not surprisingly, these didn't last long on the market, probably because buyers were either too deaf, too unconscious, or too on fire to write reviews. All of this begs a very uncomfortable question. How did we not go extinct? We humans tried to innovate comfort, and ended up creating wearable turbulence, fitness torture devices, and what was essentially a bomb with a breeze. We said, "I don't want to be hot," and instead invented unfiltered chaos. And this wasn't limited to households. There were car fans that clipped onto your dashboard and plugged into the cigarette lighter. They provided roughly 3 molecules of air per hour and a perfect pathway for small children to accidentally lose fingers. There were desk fans with blades made of metal razor wire, for the thrill. And let's not forget the horrifying silent fans that made up for their lack of noise by vibrating so hard they walked themselves off tables. We were a society so desperate for wind that we were willing to ignite it, wear it, or work out for it. And the wildest part, some of these inventions still exist. Search online and you'll find rechargeable fan hats, solar fan helmets, and even vintage gas-powered fans sold by collectors, hopefully with a warning label that just says, "Oh." Meanwhile, the pedal fan concept lives on spiritually in every gym, where bikes with fans built into the wheel now taunt you with breeze that only appears once you're already sweating bullets. And to think, all we really wanted was a slight movement of air. So the next time you press a button and feel that sweet, whisper-quiet breeze from your modern fan, take a moment to remember the brave fools who came before you. The ones who wore spinning hats, who pedaled for air like caffeinated hamsters, who ignited small engines in living rooms like it was no big deal. They walked so your Dyson could glide. Now, take a deep breath. It's not gasoline. You're safe now. Let's take a moment to appreciate what we've just witnessed. We've seen pigeons trained as bomber pilots, cats enlisted to mow lawns, and people willingly strapping spinning blades to their heads in the name of temperature control. We've explored a world where toothpaste tasted like steak, sleep aids punched you in the face, and vehicles were barely distinguishable from death traps with wheels. In short, the human race has absolutely no chill, but it does have an unrelenting, often hilarious, and occasionally flammable desire to innovate. And that's the thing, isn't it? Every truly bad idea is born from a good intention. Someone somewhere looked at a problem, sweaty armpits, dangerous commutes, snoring spouses, and thought, I can fix this. That thought was usually followed by building a contraption out of gears, glue, live animals, or gasoline. But hey, the spirit was there. Innovation is trial and error, heavy on the error. These ridiculous, often useless inventions are the fossil record of creativity in motion. For every mechanical bed that flings you across the room like a medieval catapult, there's a modern smart alarm clock that gently simulates a sunrise. For every chest-mounted vinyl record player, there's a smartphone with your entire music library in your pocket. For every gasoline-powered fan that nearly immolated Aunt Dorothy, there's a sleek, silent, bladeless fan that just works. Progress, as it turns out, isn't a straight line. It's a chaotic, zigzagging roller coaster, powered by misplaced ambition, duct tape, and questionable taste. We laugh at Victorian hygiene inventions, but without them we might never have ended up with today's sleek electric toothbrushes and deodorants that don't smell like despair. We mock early transportation flops, but they're the spiritual ancestors of hoverboards, electric scooters, and Teslas that dance when you press the right button, or the wrong one. Even the most bizarre attempts, Project Pigeon, the refrigerated hat, the meat-flavored toothpaste, teach us something. They push boundaries. They make people ask, why, and more importantly, why not? And that's when real innovation happens, somewhere between cringe and brilliance. These failures paved the road we now stroll across in comfort, preferably with shoes that aren't made of lead or wood. Every silly gadget, every half-baked idea, every failed Kickstarter campaign where someone tried to reinvent the spoon, they're all part of a long tradition of trying to be better, trying to solve problems, trying to make life a little easier, even if the result occasionally involves putting goggles on dogs or creating furniture designed by someone who hates the human spine. And sure, we still mess up. We still get tech that doesn't work right, devices that break within minutes, and trends that future generations will absolutely roast us for. But that's part of the fun, because one day, your grandkids will ask you why you ever used a smart fridge that couldn't open TikTok, why you wore Bluetooth sunglasses that only worked if the wind was blowing east, why you ever bought a Wi-Fi-enabled fork that tracked how fast you chewed. And when they ask, when their eyebrows raise, when their disbelief is palpable, you'll take a breath, chuckle softly, and say the only thing you truly can. We tried. Oh boy, we tried.